George B. Lord to take this woman, Mary Evans Carpenter, for having a cold, sick and in health, as my lawful wedded wife, till death do us part. Oh yes, Reverend, I know that I may kiss the bride, but you know I'm 70 years old and she's only 57. This could be dangerous to my health. Well, Mary, we made the newspaper. Our wedding announcement is here, right along with Cyrus Johnson's granddaughters. If you read this, Mary, it appears that I married you for your money.
Well, did you?
Listen to what it says. The Honorable George P. Lord of this city was wed Saturday at the First Congregational Church of Elgin. His bride Mary was the widow of Angelo Carpenter of Carpentersville, Dundee Township. Despite Mr. Lord's considerable wealth, it is known that the former Mrs. Carpenter for years has paid the largest property tax in Elgin and Dundee Townships due to her former husband's many holdings.
I didn't know that.
It sounds like we're the talk of the town.
Mind if I have a look?
Sure.
Well, that's something. George, look at this.
What?
Did you see this story about Dr. Tuff's farm that's been up for sale east of town? It says, a syndicate of real estate people have just purchased Dr. Tuff's farm east of town, and they've offered the 50-acre lot, it's known as Willow Creek Woods, to the city for $10,000 to put in a park.
Park? I know that property, Mary. It's a wonderful piece of property. It's got a crystal clear creek that flows down through this wide valley. And there's gently sloping hills that come down from both sides. It's beautiful. There's mature oak trees and wildlife. There are deer and fox and owls and eagles, hawks. It is a beautiful setting, Mary. You know, if development is going to go eastward from the city, what a perfect place to build a peaceful city park. I can't think of anything finer.
I hope it happens. You know, George and I traveled extensively through Europe in our previous marriages. We both enjoyed the city parks in both London and Paris. I had a favorite. I loved the gardens in the wide, just next to Hyde Park. There was a wonderful park. They had Kensington Park. Wide open, beautiful, picturesque landscapes, open walkways. It was so charming to see couples walking along, many of them parents who were looking at their children playing with little sailboats in the ponds.
My favorite was Hyde Park. Hyde Park in 1530 was church woodlands, but since then it's been taken over by the government and provided as a city park for the citizens. And here, right in the middle of crowded and congested London, England, is this wonderful, peaceful place, an oasis, a respite from all the turmoil there. Why, the Serpentine is a lake that was built by damming up the Westland River. And it's there now for boating and bathing by the people. Mary and I thought this was what the kind of thing could be done in Elgin. People here. Wonderful, wonderful idea.
That's right. So our hopes were up that the city would purchase that land and create a beautiful city park on the east side. But unfortunately, 2 years later, George came home with some disheartening news.
You know, Mary, the vote's been counted, and I don't understand why, but the people of Elgin have declined to purchase that property at Willow Creek Woodlands. I don't understand it. It would make a wonderful park. I just can't understand how the citizens don't see the value in making that kind of an investment.
George, I don't understand either. The only thing I can think of is, well, maybe because they're not as widely traveled as we are, because they haven't seen the possibilities of the beautiful city parks that we've seen in London and Paris. Their eyes just haven't been opened. Or maybe it's because when they think in terms of a city park, they're thinking of the Chicagoans who come down on the trains and go to Trout Park to drink alcohol and cause trouble. You know, George, if they can't share the same vision we have right now, what if we just bought the park for them?
Bought the park for them. Mary. Mary. It's a wonderful idea. It's great, of course. Why didn't I think of that? You know, we have been very generous with the charities in Elgin. We've supported the First Congregational Church, the YWCA, YMCA, and other worthwhile charities. But by this means, since we don't have children, we could ensure that families that come after will have a wonderful place of the kind and we could provide that for them.
But George, if we purchased the land and gave it to the city as a gift, then could we make the stipulation that there could be no alcohol at our park? That way, it would be more of a family park, just like we saw in India.
We can do that. Good afternoon. Mary and I are pleased that you all could join us today in our park for this dedication.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Colonel Andrew Apple. This is my assistant and my daughter, Mary, whose gravestone is located right next to mine. This is my gravestone right here. It may be hard to read. As your program states, I was born in 1845 and died in 1890 in Elgin, living the last 22 years of my life in Elgin at a residence on 132 North Spring Street. I was also actively involved in the Elgin fire department. But that's not why I was invited back today. That speech was given by me 10 years ago. I was asked to come today to tell you about my Civil War experiences. It started off in 1862. I volunteered in the West Virginia Infantry at the age of 17. The first 2 years of my war career were pretty uneventful. We spent 1863 and 1864 pretty much in West Virginia doing guard duty and scouting in West Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley. However, in March of 1865, our regiment's career drastically changed. We were transferred from West Virginia into the Army of the Potomac, directly under General Grant, and sent to be part of the siege of Petersburg and Richmond, the capital of the Confederates. This was done in anticipation of General Lee taking action as soon as the spring thaw finished and the roads were passable, in the cat and mouse game between General Grant and General Lee that was occurring the year before and this year. It turned out that was very prescient because on March 25th, General Lee tried to break through our ranks at Fort Stedman and was repulsed. Because of that attack, General Grant, several days later on April 2nd, decided for an all-out assault on the siege, or on the trenches and barricades and forts surrounding Richmond and Petersburg. 4:30 in the morning, our regiment was woken up and sent out. We were part of the corps that attacked Fort Gregg. Very bloody battle, hand-to-hand combat. Confederates were outnumbered over 3-1 by our army. They had no food, almost no ammunition or supplies, but one thing they certainly had, and we knew it, was unlimited courage and determination. And we faced it that day. My regiment, the 12th West Virginia Regiment, I was in Company I. Our regiment was the first to scale the walls of Fort Gregg, and our flag bearer planted our flag, and as people surely know, the flags were crucial in the Civil War, not only to muster support and courage and morale within the troops, but also as a way to guide the army. In the middle of battle, there's almost deafening noise and confusion and smoke, and the flags were used to direct the troops and make them understand where they were to go. And our flag was the first one to make it on top of Fort Gregg's walls. But the flag bearer was immediately struck down. I and several other soldiers then immediately went to the flag's rescue. We reset it, defended it from the Confederates, and eventually we won the day. That evening, Richmond and Petersburg were abandoned and evacuated by the Confederates. Their government fled, and General Lee and his army fled west, trying to get around us down south to join with General Johnston in North Carolina. And of course, as most people know, we outmarched them. We surrounded them at Appomattox Courthouse, and 1 week later there was a surrender. Because of my valor, I was awarded on May 12, 1865, the Congressional Medal of Honor, as it notes on my gravestone. That was a wonderful honor, but one that I was always reticent to talk about and didn't bring up much during my life. The last 22 years I spent in Elgin, starting with the fire department when it was first organized as a city department in 1877, rising through the ranks to become chief fire marshal in 1889. Unfortunately, later that same year, I fell off a fire truck en route to a fire call, lingered with injuries for over a year, and died the following year in 1890 at a young age of 45, leaving 4 daughters, one of which is here today, and 3 sons. I also have a sword that was an actual sword from 1862, which I'm dirtying up, that people can take a look at. Some minié balls or mini balls from the war, and some other memorabilia if you wanted to see that. Thank you for listening to my Civil War tales.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Come on over. Come over to our house. Well, a house it is not, but a home, most assuredly. Come Over to Our House was the name that we gave our 32 retail furniture stores across the Midwest. Perhaps you know them better as Leaf Furniture. Well, it was I, Arthur Leaf, who started it all so many years ago, right here in Elgin, Illinois. If you have a few minutes, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born on August the 29th in the year of 1877 in a small town called Lanark, Illinois, just west of Dixon. My family and I were of poor circumstances, therefore I was denied normal schooling. It was by diligent home study and the use of correspondence courses that I arrived at my education. My upbringing was modest and not at all noteworthy. In fact, I was unknown in Elgin until I moved here on the 5th of July, 1902. I arrived here a man of 25 years with a total capital of $12.50. I immediately opened an upholstering establishment out of a back room of a building that stood on the corner of Grove Avenue and National Street, directly across from the watch factory. My business enjoyed rapid growth, which necessitated removal to larger quarters on Grove Avenue. where the Crocker Theater would eventually reside. A second move, this time to 70 South Grove, quickly grew to include 72 and 74 South Grove Avenue. Business was good, so good that we incorporated the business just 5 years later. We soon branched out of the upholstering business and went into the manufacturing of mail-order furniture over on Raymond Street. I financed this venture by selling stocks of the company to local farmers and Elgin area residents. There's a very good chance that some of your forefathers bought such stock, and for this, I again thank you. In 1914, we discontinued the use or the mail order portion of our business. And in 1950, A. Leaf & Company entered the chain store field. So mammoth was this change that our net worth went from $100,000 in 1907 to $1.5 million in 1927. Now, as I see you sitting here, you're probably wondering what some of our best-selling items were. Without question, the value of all values was Leaf's two-piece suite in brocaded velour. This two-piece set included a beautiful Davenport and a matching chair. Fine, deep-seated coil spring construction was built into each back and seat cushion, which were reversible and was offered to our discerning public in their choice of 6 beautiful colors. How much, you ask? A mere $99, and our best-selling set was yours. For an additional $30, you could purchase a second matching chair, and delivery of all 3 pieces directly to your home, $5. On a more personal note, on May the 12th, 1920, I married Miss Grace Andrews of Elgin. And 5 years later, we had our only child, Gloria. We lived at 527 Chicago Street and maintained a winter residence in Palm Beach, Florida, and a summer home in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I was a member of the Weldwood Country Club and Masonic fraternities, among many associations, and was president of the Association of Commerce. Exactly 1 week to the day of my appendectomy, and 1 day shy of my 7th wedding anniversary, I quietly passed away. It was reported that my wife Grace immediately collapsed thereafter. Fittingly enough, they brought me here, to this beautiful place, to quietly and patiently await the loved ones that I left behind. As you can see, those that knew me best created a Davenport as a monument. This Davenport is not for me. I no longer need a Davenport. This Davenport is for you. For upon your next visit to this hallowed ground, my family and I would like you, if you so wish, to sit here a spell, to relax your feet, to contemplate your life and the world around you. I would be honored if you spent a few moments and told me about your life. I think you'll find I'm an excellent listener. With that in mind, I bid you a fond day and have a great tour of our cemetery.
You people are pretty lucky here to be with Mr. Jerry now. He's quite the guy, you know.
Yep. Yes.
He's a hard worker and not too bad looking either. You know? Some of you gals might want to check him out later on.
$20 or something?
Some of you girls might want to check him out, and I don't mean just you younger girls now too, because he can appreciate a woman who's been a little bit more mature here. Well, now I'm up at our Rovostatin. Normally I like to walk around, but now Mrs. Karen's got the Kodak out, so I got to kind of stay in this one spot here. Because, you know, once they lay you out here, you don't get the chance to move around here too much. But I was born up there north, Soledad up there north of Oslo, about 45 miles or so now. You all know where Oslo is now. That's just about the center of the world. If you kind of just take the globe and tilt it up a little bit, you see what I mean now.
So in 1869, I come over here with my brother's Fred Gardens, kind of laying over there a little ways. And you know, we left Oslo and then we come over here and we moved to Elgin now. Elgin wasn't much of a town in those days, not much at all. Just kind of like a low spot in the road that going from Chicago to Galena. Just not much more than a bunch of houses out there in the cow pasture. But you know, we went to work there at the new watch factory. They weren't the big plant in those days, though, sir. Just that one little wooden building. In time, they had 2,000 or 3,000 workers, but when we started, it was only a couple of dozen, and we was among the first. But you know, Elgin had some promise, so we stuck it out. And then one by one, my brothers come by. There was Hans, and then there Eric, and then Andrew, and then Theodore, and then we all come. There's 6 of us boys all here in Elgin. And then, you know, Svegard, he passed away really kind of early, and Hans, he took off and went off to Ohio for God knows what reason. But the rest of us stuck around, and the 4 brothers, and we made short work of it, and pretty soon there was 27 kids there between us. And that's just the first generation. And by the end of the second and the third generation, them Robostats were like lamp posters, practically one on every corner here. So, you know, in 1883, then my brother Andrew and I, now we had learned the watchmaking trade, so we went downtown and opened up our own little jewelry store. And see that's using your head. And then we started to make our own watches, these Robostat Brothers watches. He's right there on the label, those Robostat Brothers watches. See, now you can take a look at these, but they're kind of rare. So you used to be able to get all you wanted at one time down there at our store, but now they're pretty rare, so it's got to be careful. That's going to have to put a bunch of money right down here on the counter. Well, we made these watches from the parts there we bought from the factory, and some we made on our own, and then, you know, we sold the jewelry, we did silver work and such and that kind of stuff. And then, you know, we made a little bit of money and we helped to bring over other people from the old country. We bought steamship tickets and, you know, made little loans and to kind of help people get started now, not just Norskis now. We brought over some Swedes and some Danes because this here's America and we take all kinds of this country. So we bring them all over here and then we make a go of it. Now that Robostat Brothers store was there on Chicago Street all the way up to 1959. 76 years that store was in business now. Of course, I only made it about 47 years, not quite 48, and then the thing went down real fast with the stomach cancer. I think it could have been the lutefisk, but I'm not too sure about it. So anyway, they bring me out here and stretch me out, and now I'm finally been able to get up and out and move around just this one other time now. But I don't want you to go away thinking that just because you're born Norwegian and then you died young, you don't have no chance for a sense of humor. So I want to leave you with a little bit of a joke here. It's a bit of a riddle now. Now, how can you tell the difference between a Norwegian and a canoe? Any of you know? Well, if you look real carefully every now and then, that canoe might tip. Okay, now I guess I'll let you go on your way here now. So, thank you a whole lot and take good care of them there, Mr. Jerry.
Very much.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome on this, what's turning out to be a beautiful afternoon on the day of our Lord in September of 2001. I'd like you to come with me today on a journey back over 150 years to experience some of the people and sights of Elgin as it was then. My name is Marcy Billings Hendy Lord, and despite that long mouthful, I was only married once. Serendipity played a big part in my life, as it may in many of your lives also. When you could only number Elgin's ages in single digits, it was settled by a man named Joshua Morgan, who had come from Albin, New York, with his wife. Unfortunately, his young wife died, and after a certain amount of mourning, he decided to go back and make that long, uncomfortable journey back to Albin to look up the Hendy girl. I mean, to reacquaint himself and perhaps to look for a second wife. Well, as it turned out, Annette, my sister, was already married to Samuel Newell Brown, and I was married to my George. I believe you met him at the beginning of the walk. My sister Mary was engaged to Griswold Lord, who was George's brother. It was not unusual for sisters to marry brothers back in that day. But unfortunately, as wonderful a man as Griswold was, he was not very strong physically, and he passed on before they could get married. Joshua was very kind and considerate and patient, and wooed Mary until she agreed to marry him and move with him to Elgin. Well, our family was devastated. We were a very close and loving family. And to think of our sister moving halfway across the country. Also, while Joshua was in Alvin, he spoke with Samuel and George about the opportunities in Elgin. Elgin at this time was not the Wild West, but it was very sparsely settled, with a few farms and some homesteads, but the promise of some fortune to be made for hardworking people. Well, the two things are missing Mary so much, and the desire to make our own way and our own fortune caused George and I and Annette and Samuel and even our parents to come in to settle into Elgin. We settled on the southwest side of the city, and as was the custom then, streets were named after early settlers or people of prominence, and all those streets there in red are named after members of our family. I must confess, I don't understand today's custom of naming streets after geographical features that have never been part of this land. Harbor View Drive in the Midwest? Well, as you know, George, I'm sure, talked about the many things he did. He did very well in the railroad and in the watch factory, where I spent much of my time in the Congregational Church. This was the first congregation that ever met in Elgin. In fact, it met at first in Gifford's cabin. But our congregation grew very quickly, and we had to move several times from place to find larger places in which to hold our services. Each time we moved, though, we were able to sell or rent our building to another congregation, another form of religion. And that has been a large tradition in Elgin, where we had many people practicing faiths in many different ways and acceptance of those. In fact, that's probably why we were known as the city of churches later on in our history. One of the things I did and that I enjoyed so much in a congregational church was teaching Sunday school. George and I were blessed with two beautiful sons. However, one died before he reached his first birthday and the second before he reached 4. So while that was a heartbreak for me, I was able to have a wonderful time teaching students in my Sunday school class. Part of the things, as you know, as you've heard from George too, are the many things that he gave back to the city, and we felt the same. We were as one on that. My Sunday school class and I worked very hard to raise funds, and it was with a great deal of delight that we could donate stained glass windows to the First Congregational Church when the final building was built in 1889, and it's the one that they're still in today. You can see this window. There's a banner at the beginning of that window that says, donated by M. Lord and her Sunday school class. That was wonderful. Well, some people said that I have to confess, I was not as strong as I wanted to be physically either, and I had a long illness. In fact, at one time moving in with Annette and Samuel to help care for me. And I passed on in 1885. George, in his grief, commissioned this beautiful monument made for me by an Italian sculptor. Rather grand than what we lived in real life, but it is gorgeous. It was so beautiful, as a matter of fact, the Italian government asked could they please have it sent to an exhibition in Paris, which was celebrating the Italian and French sculptors of the day, and it actually won a prize. Of course, George said yes. And by the time it went to Paris, and it came back, and it was placed back at Old Sem, which is where Channing School is today. And then it was moved here in 1993 as that cemetery was closed and Bluff City Cemetery opened. George had been moved. Now I must confess, I feel that a man as loving and kind and generous as George, I'm glad he found another companion to live the rest of his life with. And she was a wonderful, generous woman also, and they joined together in giving back to Elgin many, many donations. But she didn't want my angel on her top. So they actually came up with a wonderful solution. They changed this to the Hendy Brown Memorial, and my mother, and my sister Annette and Samuel and their children are all buried around this beautiful memorial. And then we are across the street, much like life, at the Lord Memorial, and George is buried over there with me and our sons on one side, and Mary and her children on the other. I think it was a very good solution to our problem. I know you know that one of George's main contributions to the city was all that acreage for Lord's Park. But as I look today, in the 2001, I see a statue that was made, a fountain that was made in front of the pavilion was remade. And it was not people giving huge numbers of acres, but just a little bit of money. A lot of people giving some money together to make that fountain, to have that fountain in place. Then I look at the Elgin Public Museum, where finally, after almost 100 years, the North Wing was built. And again, it was a group of people making donations, giving back to their community, that allowed that to be finished. Even dear to my heart is the children who have also raised funds and contributed to a playground, a community-built playground that's now on the ground from the school. And their names are on the tickets around the playground. Then I look at the Fox River. Now the Fox River in my day was used as a source of power, and we had mighty factories along the river, and I confess also as a sewer. But as we look today, we're looking at the Fox River in the same way that George looked at Lord's Park, as a place of peace and serenity, and a place to get away from the hustle bustle of the city life. And I'm thinking that there's an opportunity now for citizens to band together and to contribute, again, a living memorial for their city. And when I think about that, I think things are not so very different after all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I see you have some seats for us,
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Spees,
Please
if
fill
we
in.
need them.
Good afternoon. I'm John Spees. I was actually born John Spees over 151 years ago, for you youngsters, 1.5 centuries ago, in Weilenburg, Germany, which is a small, beautiful town, at least it was 150 years ago, just outside of Stuttgart, where I understand they make this automobile called Mercedes. I lived there for the first 16 years of my life. That time, I hopped on a steamship. That's how we got across that big ocean, the Atlantic Ocean back then. They didn't have these big flying tubes of metal. It took 3 months to get here to this great nation, but I arrived here back in 1866. I made my way to Illinois, which is where I lived ever since. Although my first place where I lived in Illinois was in Peoria. Some of you may have heard of Peoria, which is south of here. A couple-hour drive or a couple days buggy ride back then. Couldn't get on the train. It was there that 4 years later I met my beautiful wife, Rose, who gave me 5 beautiful children, 3 daughters and 2 sons. Some of you may be more familiar with my son, Joseph Spees. He's the one who founded Spees' Department Store, which I have here on this pedestal, my son. Elgin's quality store since 1868, which may be confusing to some, because that would put me at 18 years old when my son founded it. Actually, the store originated from a gentleman named Mr. Peck. My son Joseph bought the store in 1920. Of course, changed the name. And here's the building, the original building it was in. As I understand, it actually survived till 1984. And it finally closed because of some new invention called a mall out on Route 72. Now after Peoria, I moved to several different locations in Illinois, finally ending up here in Elgin. When I was in Peoria, and all through my life, I was a harness and saddle maker. For you those young kids who don't remember that far back. Back in those days, farmers actually used horses and cows and such to pull plows through their fields. They didn't have tractors. And they needed harnesses to connect their horses to these plows. And I would build those harnesses. And I'm not ashamed to say I had a good reputation of having a very great expertise in that area. And some of my harnesses are actually still around today. saddles. Now when I moved to Elgin, I worked for the Elgin Saddlery and Harness Company for a year before I actually built my own shop, which I also have a photograph of here. The J. Spees and Company Harness and Valises shop, which I'll walk around here. Back in 1887, I ran that shop through the first Great Depression. Some of you may not be aware, but there was a depression back in 1893. Approximately, actually over half the workers at the Elgin watch factory were laid off during that time. Of course, we had a tornado here in 1896. Some of you are probably more familiar with the second tornado that hit Elgin on Palm Sunday, the Palm Sunday tornado back in 1920. In 1900, I actually sold my shop back to the Elgin Saddlery and Harness Company. But I was lucky enough, my second son, John Spees, bought or reopened the shop 2 years later. And I had the privilege of running that shop till I finally retired from that job in 1912. I went on into real estate and I sold tickets for steamship liners. It was the primary mode of transportation across the oceans back then. I have to say I didn't sell any tickets for the Titanic. But back then, 1912, until I finally retired in 1926, that's what I did. I lived through World War I. Thankfully, I was too old to fight in that war. My son's young. And I worked hard in that shop and at those jobs. But those were not my first calling. Although I was considered an expert in the area of harness making, my first calling was that of God and the Christian church. When I was 17, just after a year of being here in this great nation, I joined the Apostolic Christian Church down in Peoria. I had the honor and privilege of becoming a minister in that church at the age of 19. And I preached in that church both up here in Elgin and in surrounding states until my dying days. And that was my first calling. And that's perhaps what I am most remembered for, as well as my son's store. And back in those days, Elgin was a vibrant and bustling town. We didn't get around by automobile, we got around by streetcar. Some of you may have seen some of the rails that are left over in Elgin. Back then, horse and buggy was preferred mode of travel over automobiles. It was a wonderful time. I've seen things change over the year, but one thing remains. Elgin is still a vibrant community and a culturally diverse community. And I'm confident that 150 years from now, I'll be back here speaking to another group of people about myself again and about those who have lived after me. It's important to remember our heritage, this great city that we live in. Thank you.
Visit you, Mr. Swan.
Well, come closer. I don't get as many guests as I once did, and I always appreciate the opportunity to get to speak to people. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Mr. Theodore F. Swan, owner of the Swan's Department Store right here in town. I'm not from this area originally. I was born in Medina, Orleans County, New York in 1844. Like most people, I went to the Medina Public Schools, and then I went on to the Medina Academy. But afterwards, I went to work for my father in his grocery store. By the time I turned 19 years old, I actually opened up my own store. But it was the next year, 1864, that I would enter into a partnership that would last over 50 years. That was the year I married my wife, Susan Amanda Du Bois. We had 6 kids. But the story is getting a little bit ahead of itself. I knew that if I were going to really be a force in the retail business, it was going to be necessary for me to move out west. So I came out to a town by the Fox River called Elgin, Illinois. But I guess you folks would know that as Elgin. In 1867, I opened up a store, had a business partner named Chauncey Bailey. We had a store down there over on River Street. Things went pretty well, but Mr. Bailey was an older man, and so by 1869, he retired. That's when my one brother-in-law, Mr. W.T. Richards, went into partnership with us, and we opened up a store down there by the Chicago Street Bridge. By 1870, my other brother-in-law, Mr. M.W. Du Bois, built a brand new building, and he called it the Du Bois Opera Block. He went into business with us as well, and we called it Du Bois, Swan, and Richards. Things went really well then, but by 1873, I was pretty much ready to go it by myself. So I bought out my two partners and had 3 stores that all operated in Fountain Square. By 1880, we were adding dry goods and shoes to our inventory as well. But by 1893, business got to be so big that we had to move out of our little stores and go into this building, the Sperling Block, that was right there in downtown Elgin. This wouldn't be our last move, however. In 1908, business got to be so great that we moved into that building that Pete Burritt built, named it after his first wife, Henrietta. You'll notice over the door it says Theodore I. Swan. That's not a mistake. That was because after I passed away, my son took over the business. Eventually, we would close the doors in 1838, and another department store moved in. Now, what was the name of that store? Oh, Sears, Roebuck and Company would move into that location. Eventually, they moved on to Spring Hill Mall, and Elgin Community College took over that space where they still offer classes today. Throughout my life and through my efforts, I had a number of firsts. I was the first department store in Elgin. I was the first to have an all-cash business. The first to have female workers. The first to close my store in the evening so that the people could enjoy their time with their family and friends more. I was the first to have all cashiers and a railway system, so a clerk could write up a order anywhere in the store, put the information in the railway system, and send it right over to the cashier. The change could be sent back in the same way. On March 23rd, 1923, I passed away in Los Angeles, California. I moved out there so I could be closer to my daughter, Mrs. A.T. Winder. They brought me back here to be buried, and on the Wednesday that my funeral took place, the store closed on that day in my honor. My motto in my life was to provide honest goods and square treatment for all. I always did my best to uphold that motto both in my professional life and in my personal life. I want to thank you all for stopping by today, and stop and see Bernie Hagelow. He's got some pretty interesting stories to tell you too.
Mr. Swan, this apron is from your store.
My goodness.
It belonged to my great aunt, and she worked as a very young girl in your store and
wonderful.
sold gloves and hats.
Very good
so
indeed.
I thought I would wear that just for today.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story
Thank you
with
for all
me.
your information.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.
My name is Bernard Hagelow. My years are 1830 to 1907. In those 77 years, 11 months, and 11 days I was alive. I had 4 children, amassed 2 fortunes, and married twice. I was born in 1830 in central Germany. I was taught the paper-making trade by my father. By the age of 14, I had grown restless, and I traveled throughout Europe, refining and working on the paper trade. By the time I was 19, I decided I had to emigrate to America. I went through Canada, stayed in New York for several years, got married at Niagara Falls, worked my way up to Bloomington, Illinois, and eventually, in 1864, I ended up in Clintonville. Clintonville is now what is called South Elgin. While in Clintonville, I bought a paper factory, and I produced a paper that had not been seen in this area before. It was a roofing paper. It was a heavier based, tar-covered paper that was much more resilient to the weather. I worked there, I founded it, and I created a vast fortune. But one day in 1876, when I came outside, the whole building was afire. I still don't know why, but still, I was at that point where everything had been gone. I had to decide what to do. Would I rebuild the paper plant, or would I go to something different? And I decided to follow one of the true loves of my life. Being a German, I decided to become involved in the beer business. the Hagelo Bottling Company. I didn't produce the beer, but I bottled it and distributed it. And that took off so well that within 20 years, I had reamassed my fortune, and by the age of 68, I was able to retire. I retired to 1045 Spring Street, where I doted on my family and I became more involved in my other passions in life, them being travel and my family. I had two daughters at this point who were going to survive me. One was named Violet and the other one name was Rosa. Now Rosa and Violet were identical twins. And everything they did was identical. They would make sure every morning they wouldn't leave the house until they were dressed completely alike. From their shoes, to their dresses, to their handbags, to the jewelry. They were identical. They carried that identical behavior all throughout their lives. They married two men named Albert on the same day. One Albert Fearman, became mayor in Elgin in the early 1900s. And they both stayed prominent in Elgin social circles. I also loved to travel. By the time I had died, I had crossed the Atlantic 26 times, often in the accompaniment of Frederick Pabst of the Pabst Brewing Empire. And we went to Germany, London, Paris, and while in a German beer hall, for some reason, it was because of my, well, I assume my expanding waistline and my full gray heavy beard, that they thought I was President Harrison. And only after explaining my knowledge and deep, intimate knowledge of alcohol and brewing did they realize I was a true German and I could not have been President Harrison. So I was president for a day. Also during my retirement, I became much more involved in the Masons. Now, like all prominent businessmen at that time, I joined several social organizations. I served on the Board of Education in Clintonville, but I always came back to the Masons. By the time I had died, I had reached a 32nd degree, which is a high-ranking Mason official. And unlike some men who are Masons till they die, I decided to carry that one step further. So if you would be able to see into the cemeterium where I am now buried, you'll notice that I am buried in my full Masonic uniform, from my hat to my gloves to my sword. And that's the way you would find me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.